The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good day, and welcome to the Agilys webinar. My name is Dominic Haig of Agilys Software, and I'll be taking us through our presentation and discussion today. So without further ado, let me move ahead and talk you through our agenda on our webinar, where we're going to be talking about can a single license management solution actually accommodate all the different types of licensing models and particularly deployment scenarios that software vendors are likely to encounter. And so what we're going to be talking through will be, first of all, a quick overview about Agilys, and then talking about product activation and what that means, which is fairly well understood on connected systems, but then what about some of those corner cases that the one or two customers you might have where they don't have a network connection, they have regulations or controls, rules about letting information out of their premises and so forth. Then talk about floating licensing and some new options of floating licensing along with the traditional models. And then talk a bit about operations and how you can automate operations even across all these different types of models that we'll be describing. And then we'll go through to a demonstration. And at the end, I'll be happy to answer questions. What I'd say is, as we're going through, if you do have any questions, you should see the questions panel up in your control box. Do feel free to enter your questions there at any time, and I'll be happy to answer those at the end. And if we don't have time, then we'll answer them by email afterwards. And to answer the first question that normally always comes up, yes, we will be making this presentation available to all of you. We're sending you an email later on today with the access details for the presentation. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit more about Agilys, who we are. So Agilys, we're a 7-year-old company. We're based in Santa Clara in Northern California, and our entire focus is on license management solutions. That's what we do. And a good question or valid question to ask is, so what do you bring to the party? What does Agilys bring to this market? And based on the feedback we've received from the market and from our customers, it will be pretty much as follows, that with Agilys, as we started with a clean sheet some years ago, then we were able to develop solutions which are designed, as I hope you'll see in the webinar today, for the world as it is today, where we have the internet, but we also have wide area networks and VPNs and firewalls and proxy servers and so forth. But where, rather than the world as it was 10 or 20 years ago, where you had small but pretty reliable local area networks, that these days network connectivity cannot be assumed. So we've designed our solutions to be able to take advantage of whatever network connectivity is there, but not to assume it's always going to be present. We use a range of different standards for as it says, for deployability, for interoperability, and so forth, things like HTTP, relational databases, Java, web services, and so forth. And along with all the various other things that we pay attention to as we're developing our solutions, then I hope what you'll see as we're going through will be that we pay particular attention to ease of use for you as a software developer, and ease of use for your end customers as users of applications that are protected by our solutions. So over that time, we've acquired several hundred customers. In last count, it was some 12, 14 countries around the world. And this includes people such as the US Navy, Fair Isaac, Harris, Lockheed Martin, Fujitsu, Orc Software in Sweden, people in Israel, in a whole range of different industries. Primarily software vendors, but we do also have some companies who are shipping embedded systems, combined hardware and software systems, where either the software or the software and the hardware are protected with our solutions. And while we don't always know where the end applications or systems are going which are protected by Agilys's license management systems, we do know there are some Agilys protected applications working in some very demanding end customer environments, demanding in terms of the network connectivity allowed and so forth. So there are some Agilys protected applications working inside for example, the US National Security Agency, inside the Israeli and South Korean defense organizations, large banks such as Bloomberg, ING, Nomura, and so forth. So in terms of the solutions that we offer, in fact, the primary focus of our discussion today is going to be really in two areas. But let me walk through what we offer overall. So first of all, our Easy Licenser License Manager. primarily for more straightforward applications, standalone license management, multi-threaded server applications. We'll be spending most of our time today talking about our Orion network licensing platform, as Orion supports a range of licensing models, both internet-based product activation, internet-based floating licensing, and floating licensing or product activation from an Orion license server, which is redistributed by you and installed on the end customer's network. And one of the primary advantages of Orion for you as a software vendor is that all those different scenarios, be it product activation from a hosted server, activating node lock licenses from a redistributed server, floating licensing of various kinds, and so forth, and they're all supported by the same solution, and it's the same integration into your application, just one application integration, so you can provide the same executable to your customers who are using your software in all those different ways, licensing it in those different ways. Just the one executable, you wouldn't need to do different integration. Now, if you want to do internet-hosted licensing, then you can certainly host the Orion server in your own data center. If you don't want to do that, we offer our Acropolis on-demand managed licensing service. So that's a service we offer, and we could have a service turned on for you this afternoon, be up and running with a hosted licensing service run out of a Tier 1 data center. And then the other solution or service that we'll be demonstrating later on is our Acropolis Integration Manager. And the Acropolis Integration Manager, as you'll see, it's a hosted service, and or AIM as we call it, Acropolis Integration Manager, that's all about operations. How do you make it easy for your operations people, your fulfillment staff to set up licenses, to issue them to customers, for customers to be able to download them if they're obtaining a file, for example, as a part of their license. How do you keep track of the licenses you've issued and so forth? Dealing with, one of the deployment issues, but of how do you manage issuing licenses via resellers and so on. That's all in the province of AIM. So let me move straight ahead and talk about product activation. So what I'll do is just talk pretty quickly through the standard scenario, if you will, and then we'll come to what are some of the more interesting corner cases of where the standard scenario doesn't apply. So let's say you have the standard setup. You have your user system over here on the right. Let's assume to start with it has a network connection. Then you have a hosted Orion server, whether in your own data center or hosted by Agilus on our Acropolis service. And then you'd be setting up licenses, either you as the software vendor or your reseller, either from any web browser or automatically, perhaps via web services out of your back office system. So let's just walk through the standard process. Somebody buys, they request a license from you. They place an order, they request a trial license. And what you do is you set up that license for them in the hosted Orion server under a unique product serial number. And that product serial number is not a key, it's just an identifying string saying that is used to identify that particular license. And you can specify that to be whatever you want. So it can have semantics or not, as you wish. And all you then need to do is to send an email to the customer saying, thank you very much for your order, we've received your order for this product with these features and so on, and here's your product serial number. And here's where you download the software, whatever the message might be. So they go ahead and install your application from whatever the usual process might be, and there is then an activation event required to enable the software to work. So they enter in that product serial number, copy and paste it out of the email perhaps, and at that point the Orion client software that's built into your application connects to the Orion server, asks, is this a valid product serial number that's not previously been used to activate a license? And what are the license limits that were set up in the Orion server for me to apply to this instance? It also reads from the machine it's running on what are the parameters of that machine that license is to be locked to. So MAC address, host ID, CPU ID, hard disk ID, whatever it might be. And it takes those locking parameters and the license limit information and it encrypts it and saves it in a file that's local to that machine that we call the activation record. So henceforth, each time after that the application runs, it performs its license check. The license check interrogates that local activation record so it can check it's running on the correct machine, and it can inform the application of what its license limits are. So is it still within its time limit, how are the features configured, and so forth. So after that initial activation event, there's no further communication required with the license server. And a number of things went on under the covers, but as far as the the user is concerned, they placed an order with you, they received an email, they installed your application, they pasted in their product serial number, and a few hundred milliseconds later, they were done. And their application now runs on their machine as they had ordered it. So what are some of the benefits of this for you as a software vendor? So first of all, obviously the activation is automatic. There are no keys to distribute. It's secure. The node locking is automatic. And there's a capability in Orion I'll mention briefly that we call fuzzy fingerprinting. And fuzzy fingerprinting is designed to deal with the issue where, let's say you lock your application to 3 parameters of the target machine: MAC address, host ID, CPU ID, whatever it might be. And that works fine, but then some months later, a year later maybe, the user does some minor change to their machine, a minor hardware upgrade, and one of those parameters changes. Now, with fuzzy fingerprinting, what you can do is specify that you want to lock to those 3 parameters, but that a license check can pass if at runtime, say 2 out of the 3 parameters that you recorded the names of at activation time, if those match the values you read at runtime. So you can provide a little resiliency against minor system changes while still keeping it perfectly secure. You can also manage licensing via resellers or partners, and I'll be saying more about this in the context of AIM. But what this system lets you do is deal with the essential issue with resellers, which is that you want to be able perhaps to delegate the mechanics of fulfillment of orders to your reseller or your OEM partner, your channel partner, but you want to know what they're doing. So you want to know what licenses they've issued, how they've been configured. You might even want, for example, to be capturing user registration information from that the user enters at activation time and recording that, so you know who your end users are, even though the license may have been sold via a reseller, and Orion lets you do that. Another thing you can do with this system is do things such as manage maintenance and support subscriptions, something a number of our customers do. And essentially what you do here is when somebody buys a license for your software product and they perhaps also buy a 1-year maintenance and support subscription, is you track that as well as a separate product, if you will, in the Orion server. So for example, that lets you do things such as your application installer can be running a license check against the maintenance and support subscription, so it would know if that user is entitled to install a new version or an upgrade. It means your support staff could be checking to see if that user is entitled to premium support or not. And you could also be getting an automatic email alert from the Orion license server, maybe 45 days before that license before that subscription expires, so they'd know to go and chase the customer and contact them to renew their maintenance and support. In terms of operations costs, obviously the activation is automatic. There's no administration required, and we'll come to what happens when you have disconnected systems in a moment in various ways. Another thing Orion lets you offer is user self-service license relocation. And this deals with the scenario where somebody activates a license on a machine and then 6 months later they think, well, I'd want to have that license on I want to move it to my new desktop or to my laptop, whatever it might be. So there's a first-class mechanism in Orion for allowing users to deactivate their license on the first machine, then go over and activate it reactivate it on the second machine. But you as a software vendor, you control whether a given user is allowed to relocate their license and how often they can do so. So you could limit them to where, say, they're not allowed to activate their license more than, or relocate their license, more than once every month, for example, if you're concerned about them actually sharing the license with somebody else. And Orion keeps track of the machines that have license relocations and license deactivations and so on, so you know what's going on. And you can also, as we'll see, you can delegate your administration to your resellers or even to enterprise end users. So you could set up a pool of licenses for a reseller so they can configure those and set them up and issue them to their end direct customers. Or if you had an enterprise end user that had bought maybe 10 or 15 licenses, you can set up a pool of licenses for that enterprise user and provide them with a login just to their pool of licenses. So your customer's system administrator can be running reports, assigning licenses to users, further constraining license limits within the overall limits you've set for their licenses. In terms of flexibility, we'll talk more about license limit setting a bit later on, but you can control a number of different parameters, how your product functions are set up, time limits, usage limits, and so forth. License upgrades are straightforward to administer. That say somebody buys a one-year license or has a 30-day trial license and then renews for a year, you would just change the license limits in the server. They would do the activation again for that new limit to take effect. Another interesting capability is based around the idea of using a license lease, and the primary thing this gives you is the idea of a revocable license. So the normal setup, the vanilla setup, as I said, is where somebody activates their license, and let's say it was a one-year license. There's that one activation event, and that license will then carry on working on that user's machine for a year with no further communication required with the server. However, what you can do is you can set up somebody's license so that it requires regular revalidation against the license server. So the application has to phone home every week, every 2 weeks, every month, whatever it might be, to validate that its license is still active, and if it isn't able to do so, it'll stop working. So what that means is if you set up somebody's license in that manner, at any point you could go into the license server, cancel their license, and that user is going to get at most whatever it was, whatever the validation period was. Let's say it's a week. They're going to get at most 1 week's more usage out of that license before it stopped running. So if you're ever selling a license into somebody who, for example, they have uncertain credit, or it's a renewable subscription type of setup, a renewable monthly subscription, for example, you would set them up on a 1-month license lease, and if they at any point don't pay up on their subscription, you can just cancel their license. Another useful capability is to do data upload and download. So when somebody activates a license, as well as Orion will always capture the ID of the machine on which the license has been activated, but you can do things such as, for example, put up a dialog box and be asking further questions of the user, such as their name, their company, their industry, their intended use of their application, and so forth, and be storing that data in the Orion server. So, for example, if you're selling via resellers, this is where you could be capturing user registration information. So even though you weren't involved in the sale, you know who has your licenses. And you can also download data. So you could be downloading information about new versions, special promotions, and so forth. And as we'll see, that if you have, for certain customers, you want to offer floating licensing or licensing from a redistributed server, then same executable, same API, same system, just a different deployment scenario. And then finally, in terms of business intelligence, you have full records of all activation events as a built-in report generator. You'd be capturing data at activation time and so on. In terms of benefits for your end customers, obviously the fulfillment is immediate. They don't need to wait for somebody to come into the office for their license to be, to send them a code or something that it'd be 24/7 worldwide. They don't need to send you any information about their system. As you allow them to, they can relocate their licenses, they can get upgrades and so on. They don't need to manage license keys. And you can offer many different kinds of license models, all from the same executable. And one thing I will mention briefly, the user briefcase. This is a function built into Orion, so when a user relocates their license, that is, they deactivate it on the first machine, then go over and activate it on the second machine, you can automatically transfer user settings from the first machine to the second. So if over time your user has set up your application as they want to see it with the short form of this menu and this function here and whatever it might be, you can automatically transfer that data via the Orion server, so the new installation comes up in the same state as they'd left the first one. Okay, so that's all great if you have a network connection. So what if you don't? Let's start moving into some of the more corner case scenarios. So the primary mechanism, and there are others, but for dealing with that instance is what we call SneakerNet. So the same setup as before, but in this case there's no network connection from the user's machine. So what happens here is the users place their order, they've got their product serial number, and they enter it as they're doing the installation, but the Orion client finds it can't connect to the server. So what it does is it takes that product serial number and the locking parameters and encrypts them and saves them in what we call the fingerprint file. And it then puts instructions on the screen to the user telling them to save that file onto some transportable medium, a thumb drive, whatever it is, and go and find an internet terminal and upload that file at the self-service web page for the hosted Orion server. So they do that, The Orion server accepts the file, checks it's valid, and generates the activation record, which it returns to the user, which they can then walk back over to their machine. So you end up with exactly the same outcome as for a connected machine, which is that it's, first of all, it's fully automatic as far as you're concerned. There's nothing for your operations people to do over the connected scenario. It's autonomous, it's on demand for the user, it's obviously secure, these are all encrypted files. And there is a batch mode available, so if somebody is activating 10 licenses in a go, they can do that in one atomic upload and download operation. So that's SneakerNet, where, and that obviously an obvious extension of this is that that user could be sending the fingerprint file to you by email, in which case your operations people would generate the activation record and email it back, even by snail mail. Obviously the same thing could be done. However, generally our customers find that if a user has access to email, that they can generally get to a web browser screen and just help themselves at the self-service web page. So our customers find that these two cover the majority of scenarios, but we run across users who have other scenarios. So one would be where there is no way of getting that fingerprint file back to the vendor to generate the activation record. And this might be, the instances it run off might be of somebody said that we're installing our software on a machine in the desert. It was as a communication system, and they knew all about the machine because they put it in, but the service guy was going to be traveling out presumably in some four-wheel drive truck to the middle of the desert to go and install the software. So in this case, what you can do is this assumes that you know what those locking parameters are, the MAC address, the system serial number, whatever it is that application is to be locked to. And in this type of scenario, that's often the case. So you know what those locking parameters are. So what you can do is use the Agilist key generation utility to generate the activation record file ahead of time, and then just take it as a file on a thumb drive, whatever it might be, and hand carry it, email it, send it in whatever fashion to the end user. And obviously, as I said, in the case of the communication system in the middle of the desert, then the engineer would generate the activation record file, take it with him on a thumb drive, drive across the desert, load it onto the machine to enable the software. So there can still be if you will, a one-way, more key-like type of activation in the circumstances where you know what those locking parameters are. Now, a variant of that, again, which might be required in some corner cases amongst your customer base, would be where they don't want to have pure software type licensing at all, but for whatever reason prefer dongle-based licensing. And that can be supported by Orion. What you do in this case is you pick some suitable hardware component, and what you need is something which has a unique readable signature that you can use as the unique hardware identifier. And something some of our customers often use is just a USB Ethernet module, which by definition has a unique MAC address. So using the key generation utility, you generate an activation record which is locked to that signature of that piece of hardware, and you can then just send the piece of hardware and that activation record to the end customer. Any machine that has that unique piece of hardware plugged into it, and where they're using that activation record, is going to allow your software to run within the license limits defined within that activation record. So this allows you to offer dongle-based licensing, but all still within using the one Orion solution, the one API, the same executable that's built into your end application, and it still has all the licensing flexibility of Orion in terms of setting up how your product features are configured and so forth. So that's perhaps the extreme case of not having any network connection. Now, another instance that can arise is where you have an end customer and they have an internal network, but they have strict controls on what's allowed to go outside their network. So it could be that this often happens in things such as the finance and mil aero defense, some government sectors. So in this case, there's no direct connection from the internal machines to the external network, but you have a couple of options for still enabling automatic activation. The first of which is that there is direct client-side support in Orion for appropriate forward HTTP proxy servers. So if there's an appropriate proxy server available on that customer's network, then the Orion server the Orion client can use that to punch out and connect to the hosted Orion server for automatic activation and relocation. Now, if there isn't an appropriate proxy server available, another option is the Orion licensed proxy server. This is a part of the Orion package. It's a piece of software you can redistribute and install on your end customer's DMZ machine, and all that will do is route the Orion checkouts, check-ins, license requests, and so on between the internal network and the external network. So you can still do automatic activation of licenses over the from that internal system. In fact, this can be a multi-step type activation. One of the more complex ones we've seen in our customers is where there was a software application essentially on an embedded system, and then that embedded system was sold by a partner of the software vendor who was using Orion. So the actual path taken by the activation request, if you will, was from that embedded component through a custom proxy server on the embedded system, out over the internet to the vendor of that embedded system, through an Orion licensed proxy server, back over the internet and back to the Orion licensed server at the software vendor's premises, and then by return to complete the activation step. So it's in fact 2 steps over the internet and 2 proxy servers, and they're able to do that, to support that. Now, a couple of other things I mentioned in terms of product activation. That what we've been talking about so far is activation where you have a one-to-one, this product serial number corresponds to that license, one-to-one. Orion also supports what we call anonymous user product activation. In this case, so instead of having a one-to-one, this is the license and this is the product serial number, you can have a pool of licenses. So an enterprise customer might buy 15 licenses, and then there's just one product serial number that describes and is associated with that pool. So any authorized user that has that product serial number can activate a license, and Orion is going to enforce that limit of 15 licenses active at any one time. So you don't need to send them 15 different licenses for each individual user. However, although we call this anonymous user licensing, you can nevertheless obtain usernames and so on at the time a license is activated, so you know who's got which licenses. It's just anonymous in that any authorized user can can check out an available license. And this enterprise pool, it can be on a hosted Orion server, it can be on a redistributed license server. We'll come to talk more about redistributed servers in a moment. Okay, let me move now to a survey question. So let me come to here, 1 second, pop this up. So I wonder if you could perhaps take a look, you should see up on your screen now, which of these node lock licensing scenarios you think would apply that you would need to support. And please click all the ones that apply. So would it be via the straight internet connection, a direct internet connection, via SneakerNet, where you're using the file transfer to an internet terminal, via email, by generating the activation record using some piece of hardware, or by using a dongle. So I'll give you perhaps a minute to go ahead and vote on that. Please click on as many of those as you feel would apply to you. So all the ones that might apply. And we're looking at corner cases here. So if you think there's one user out there where they're going to want a dongle, then please go ahead and click on that. Give you a few more minutes to get some more votes coming in. Interesting, I'm seeing results. I'll pop up the results in a moment when I'll give you perhaps another 30 seconds for everybody to vote. More votes coming in. A couple more seconds. Okay, let me put the pop those results up. So you should be able to see that so everybody's talking about email-based internet connection. Okay, interesting. All right, good. So let me move on here. So now let's talk about floating licensing, and I'm using the term floating licensing here. Actually, it's really what we're talking about, as you'll see, is the concept here. The key concept is, in fact, that the Orion server is redistributed by you and installed on your end customer's network, is one of the ways of doing this, or it's floating licensing over the internet. So here is floating licensing. Could be over any type of network. And as I mentioned, you have the two types of models. You have a named user license where a particular individual has a license that's dedicated to them and is managed under a unique username. Or you could have anonymous user licenses. So this could be, and you could have any number of pools of anonymous user licenses. So you could have 5 licenses being shared by the engineering group, and 4 shared by marketing, and 10 shared by the admin group, and so forth. All managed from and it could be from a license server hosted on the internet or a redistributed license server. So let's talk about internet-based floating licensing to start with. So as before, the Orion license server could be hosted by you in your data center. It could be hosted by Agilis. It could be named user or anonymous user, as I mentioned. And some of the advantages of doing internet-based licensing over the more traditional, I'm going to put a license server on your premises type of floating licensing. First of all, there's no license server for your customers to even have to think about, to install and manage and update and so on. You have access to all their licensing activity data, so you know what your customers are doing. You know, for example, if they're frequently hitting their maximum user count limit, so you have the data to perhaps go and convince them that they should buy more licenses from you. You just need to have one license server to manage all your customers' licenses, and each pool of licenses for each customer is managed individually with their own limits and user count and so forth. And of course, licenses are revocable. So if at some point that customer ceases to pay or whatever it might be, you can just cancel their licenses and they'll stop operating. Only one Orion server or Acropolis service required for all your customers, and you define all the various limits that apply. So 15 licenses and 1-year subscription and so many functions enabled and so forth. And there are other parameters that you can control. Things such as a useful one is the minimum license checkout time. So and one reason you might want to set a minimum license checkout time would be, let's say you wanted to control the rate at which users could share licenses. So, for example, if you set a minimum license checkout time of 12 hours, that means that in any one day, 24-hour period, a given license can be used by not more than 2 people. So you can control the rate of sharing. You can delegate the admin and reporting to your customers, so you could provide them with a login to your customer sysadmin, so from any web browser they can be logging in and managing their licenses, running reports and so forth. And you have the option of distributing the Orion server. Say you have customers who say, well, I don't want to have any network. I want to have nothing going outside my network. It has to be entirely self-contained within my network. You can redistribute the Orion server for installation on their network, provide them with the license key that will define how many licenses are enabled, what functions are turned on, and so forth. And then some advantages Orion brings in this scenario is they would only need one Orion server for their entire global wide area network. That unlike older systems, you don't need to have a license server per local area network with pooling and load balancing and all that stuff. That just one server would cover their entire global network. It does support commuter licensing, but again, unlike older systems, but securely. So somebody could check out a license onto a laptop for 2 weeks maybe, and while they're off the network, that license is securely locked to that machine automatically, and the license server knows that it's there, and it won't make that license available to anybody else. And people can check out licenses onto disconnected systems, as we've described for the product activation scenario, that somebody could obtain a floating license, for example, via SneakerNet. Finally, another option is you can also embed the Orion server. And actually, there's a case study up on our website of a customer, a company called Agitar, that's doing just that, of embedding the Orion license server in their system, so it's invisible to the customer. Now, in terms of internet-hosted floating licensing, this is a little different from the traditional methods. I want to talk through that a little bit more. So, the basic way that this typically works, you think about this working in traditional floating licensing over a local network, is that acquiring and releasing the license is transparent, and there are no explicit steps for going ahead and checking out a license and returning it and so forth. Now, with conventional floating licensing, what happens is, this is with the older type system, so the application checks out the license at startup, and when the application is exited, it releases its license. And older systems tend to require that the application and the license server both be running at the same time, and there's heartbeats, and each licensed instance can take up a socket and so forth. So things which are generally don't work very well in modern networks with firewalls and proxy servers and VPNs and so forth, which tends to leave with issues with availability, scalability, not a very scalable approach. What Orion does with floating licensing is that the application is going to independently retain its checkout state in a local activation record, so there isn't that heartbeat concept that once an application has got its license, it then doesn't need to communicate any further with the server during the period of that license checkout. And you can set up how long that license checkout can be. It could be anywhere from minutes or hours to days, whatever you want that to be. Meanwhile, the license server is independently keeping track of that user's status. So, for example, if a checkout is done for 1 day and it's not renewed, then at the end of that day, the application is going to stop running on the user's machine, and the license server is going to automatically release that license and make it available to somebody else to check out. So there's no need for the application to return the license. So in effect, what you can end up with is something which, if you want, mimics the way that the traditional floating licensing works, but in an internet-type environment and in an approach which is scalable and secure and does fit with today's network environment. So let me go to another survey question. Look at floating licensing. Let me pop that up. So let me ask you, will you want to offer floating licensing? And again, pick all those that apply. Be yes from a redistributed license server installed on your customer's premises. Could be yes from a hosted license server, meaning floating licensing over the internet. Saying yes, you want to offer activation of node lock licenses from a redistributed server, meaning where the essential model your customers are doing are node lock licenses, but there's no internet connection required at all. There's an Orion license server installed on your customer's premises, and the licenses are activated from that server with no external communication required at all. So please go ahead and vote. Pick all the ones you think might apply, and bear in mind that you can offer all of these, all of these from with the one Orion solution with the same application executable. That these are all just different deployment options. So if you think you might have even one user out there, for example, that is going to say, yes, I want to do node lock licensing, but I can't allow any communication outside my network, then, for example, option 3 would be an appropriate one from them. Let's give you a few more minutes. Any other votes to come in? And it looks like, in fact, the licensing from a redistributed server is going to be the top one. It looks pretty popular. Okay, all right, good. Thank you for that. Okay, let me move on. Now let me talk briefly about license limit settings. So what we've been talking about so far have been the various deployment options, internet-hosted licensing and activation and disconnected systems and so on. But what are the different kinds of license limits you can apply to your product via this type of system? And this applies to all of the different deployment scenarios. So first thing to note is that the license limits can be set at the level of the product, at the level of a license pool, and our term for that is actually an admin domain, or the level of an individual user's license. So for example, if you have a redistributed license server and you're enabling a product in that license server that's installed on your customer's premises, you would set limits at the level of that product. You'd say you've got 10 licenses and feature A is on and it's a 1-year license and whatever it is, and that would apply to all those licenses in that for that product. Similarly, you can set them at the level of a pool. If you have an enterprise customer for whom you've set up a pool of licenses, for example, from a hosted server, you could set up limits at the level of that pool that would then apply to all the licenses within that pool. So first of all, the kinds of things we're talking about, first of all, a time limit. So this could be any number of days, could be 30 days, 45 days for a trial license, 1-year subscription, 2-year subscription, whatever it is. And there are two kinds of time limit. There's a relative time limit, meaning if I give you a 30-day license, Orion is going to enforce that 30 days from whenever you first activate your license. Or it can be absolute, meaning you've got a 30-day license, but irrespective of when you activate it, it's going to expire on October 20, whatever it be, 22nd. The other thing you can set up are two other parameters, which are a warning threshold and a grace period. So, for example, I could set up a trial license for somebody and say you've got a 30-day license. I could also set it with a 10-day warning threshold and a 5-day grace period. That means that when the application does its checkout and it's within that warning threshold, then it can put up a message to the user saying your trial license is about to expire. Please contact the company on this number to purchase your production license, whatever it might be. And then during the grace period, the application, you could put up a stronger message. It could work in reduced capability mode. It could turn off some functions, for example, and your trial license has expired. Please contact urgent, and so on. The other type of thing you can do is what we call, actually the term we use is licensing options. So these could map to features or modules in your application, and you can define any number of such options. So for a given product, you could have features A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. And for each such feature or module, you have an associated parameter, and you can define the allowable set of parameters for a given feature. So as it says up there, for feature A, it could be either on or off. Feature B could be off or at the basic or the standard or the professional level. Feature C could be off or be at level 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be. So when you configure a license for a particular user or for a pool of licenses, whatever it is, you could say, well, for this customer, I want feature A to be on, and feature B at the standard level, and feature C at level 5, and feature D to have capacity of 200, whatever it might be, for as many of such features as you wish to set up. You can also do what we call complex feature licensing, and this is where you're applying more sophisticated licensing models to each such feature. And there's an example listed there where somebody might have a, if you will, a seat count, if you want to think of it that way, of basic licenses, 15 basic licenses, but they have a smaller number of licenses for each individual feature, each with their own limits, such as a 30-day time limit. So they've got feature A on trial. They've got 8 licenses for feature B at the professional level, and so on. And those licenses for the features are shared across those 15 basic licenses. So Orion's going to enforce that count limit and the time and level limits and so on each of those individual licenses. Another type of licensing you can do is usage-based licensing. And the two terms that we use here are two models on metering and debiting. And by metering, we mean where the usage is being tracked and recorded over time, but there's no specific limit being set, but your user's usage of your application is being recorded for later billing or analysis, whatever it might be. And debiting is where somebody has a usage, they've purchased a usage quota from you. As they're working with your application, each time they call particular high-value functions, for example, that usage quota is debited, and when they've exhausted that inventory, then they need to buy more quota from you. As with a time-limited license, you can set up a warning threshold and a grace quantity on a quota. So somebody could have a quota of 1,000 points with a warning threshold of 100 and a grace quantity of 50, for example. And you can, in fact, track any number of custom usage counters, whether online or offline. And there's an interesting case study up on our website, Fair Isaac, the financial risk analysis software company, who are using Orion in just this way with quite a sophisticated offline metering type application where they're locally recording usage of a number of different usage counters, and then once a month they upload that data and use it as the basis for billing. So let me ask you, put up another poll of which of these type of models you think would be useful for you. So let me pop that up. So which license models of these do you think you want to offer? Again, pick all the ones that apply. So time-limited licenses for a trial or subscription. The user count-based, meaning somebody can have 10 licenses, they have 5, 15, whatever it might be, whether that's a floating or a node locked. Feature-based, meaning I want to turn on feature A and set feature B to professional level and so on. Usage-based, or just a straight perpetual license. So enable a license is good forever, and you're done. So please go ahead and click on those. And again, pick all the ones that you think might apply, whether it's something that this might be something you definitely know you need to do now, or it could be something that perhaps your marketing colleagues would like to do in next year, something such as that. So sort of looking out into the future now as to what you think your colleagues would like to do. I'll give you a few more, a little bit longer to vote on that. And not surprisingly, trial description is coming in as the lead. Everybody wants to do that. I think everybody wants to offer trial licenses. And they're actually pretty even across all the others, so the user count, feature-based, usage-based, and so on. A couple of seconds more to get those votes in. Yep, so everybody wants to do, 100% trial or subscription licenses. And actually, the user count base is dropping back a bit. Okay. All right, a couple of seconds more. Any more votes? Any other license models people would like to offer? Okay. All right, we're done. All right, thank you. So that was what I want to talk about. Now I want to move on and talk about the Acropolis Integration Manager. I'll do this fairly briefly and give us time to get to the demonstration. So what I've spoken about to date is the licensing system, about what Orion can do. Now I'm going to talk about AIM, which is all about operations. So what is AIM? It's a hosted service, and it's about how do you actually get licenses to your customers and manage them and deal with updates and management and reporting and so forth. And the kind of reasons you would use it is it obviously takes out a lot of your operations infrastructure. One thing it does let you do is particularly valuable if you have more than one type of licensing system. If, for example, you've got some legacy system you built in-house years ago that you'd like to migrate away from over time, but you can't just switch over all in one go, then you can manage any number of different tools under AIM. But as far as your operations people and resellers and so on are concerned, they just have one portal they go to generate licenses. So it abstracts out what the underlying licensing system might be. And it is a smoother operation for your end users. So the basic setup with AIM, so you have the AIM system, actually based around it, uses an Orion server at its core. And then plugged in on this side, any number of key generators. So it could be Agilus's Easy Licenser key generation system, calling that API. Could be any number of other license generators. As I said, if you've got an in-house system, third-party system, you have a key generator you can plug in for generating keys for different products. And then the email notifier for providing licenses out to your end customers. And then plugged in on this side, there could be the web portal that you or your resellers, your enterprise customers are logging into to generate licenses. And it could be integration with your back office or CRM systems over web services. So again, so they have a single interface for calling and generating licenses no matter what the underlying licensing system might be. So the type of system topology you might have in terms for a product activation, first of all, you'd have yourself or your reseller, either from a web browser or from your back office system up here, talking over the internet to AIM. And AIM running on its own Orion server and the email server, talking out over the internet to your end customer over here. So your application installer, this is, say, as I said, this is a product activation scenario. So in the connected scenario, if this user has a direct internet connection from their application, they're going to talk directly over the internet to the Orion server. If you're using SneakerNet, then they'd go via the web browser for the offline activation. And, of course, they'd have the email client for receiving the email that has the product serial number and the download information and so forth. In terms of if you have an Orion server redistributed, installed on your end customer's network, the same setup over here with yourself or your reseller and then the AIM system at Agilus. Then on your customer's premises, you'll have the Orion server. And the way you enable licenses, as I've said in Orion server, is you send them a license key which encrypts, is loaded into that Orion server, and that key encrypts for a given product how many licenses are to be enabled, what features, and so forth. So AIM is going to be sending the email to the customer. They're going to be going and picking up their key from their self-service web page and loading into the Orion server, where it then manages licenses for the installed applications over their internal network. Now, in terms of the capabilities, the main one, as I said, an important one, is that it lets you abstract out from the underlying licensing system. So your order processing people, management, and so on are dealing with your things in terms of your customers and license agreements and your own terminology for your product. They're not having to think about what perhaps the terminology and details of the underlying licensing system. You can have many reseller accounts, salespeople accounts, operations accounts, and so on, and people being able to log into AIM and set up licenses. You can support many different kinds of underlying licensing systems, obviously built-in support for Orion and for Easy Licenser, and you can plug in if you have an existing legacy system. And if you want to quickly add in add in new products, set up new product options, things such as that, send up new email templates. Then there's a rapid configuration there, so you can quickly add in new products to your existing system. And well, actually, these things down here I will show you in the demonstration. Things such as email preview and so forth. I think we'll make those clearer. So let me move on here. So let me pull up. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to log into let me find the right window. There we go. So I'm going to log into AIM, into a demonstration service we have set up, and give you the basic idea of how AIM works. So the idea here, this is the AIM login screen. I'll log into our demonstration account, and I'm going to log in as a company Acme Software, and I'm going to log in as an Acme Software operator. You can see here I could also be logging in as a reseller. I could have a reseller account set up in this service, perhaps with constraints on the licenses I'm able to generate. But I'm going to just go ahead and log in here as an operator for this company Acme Software. And you can see here, this is the AIM web portal as it's been set up for Acme. And first thing I'm going to do up here in the customer account panel is I need to set up. Okay, I've just logged in. I want to issue a license for, let's say, a single node locked product activation type scenario. So the first thing I'll do is pick the customer. If they're already in the system, I can pick them here, or I can add a new one. But let's go ahead and simplicity just pick an existing customer. So I populate it with the data for that customer. And for a given customer, you might have several different license agreements with them, perhaps with different terms and so on. So a construct supported by AIM is the idea of having a number of different license agreements all with the same customer. So let's pick an existing license and say we're issuing a license under an existing license agreement. Okay, so I've got the customer, I've got the license agreement. Next, I'll come down here to the product panel. So I'm going to pick what type of product license it is I want to generate. In this case, let's say it's a small business license, which is the single node lock model and the activation model. And what AIM is going to do is going to send an email automatically to this customer with the details once I've set up this license. So I'm going to say, yeah, I want to preview the email. I do want to send the email, and I want to preview it. So I'll come down here to the user license panel. Now, this window here is the product serial number. If I just leave it like that, then AIM is going to automatically set up a unique product serial number for me. I can just click on here and enter one if I want to specify what that's to be. Or what I can do is I can say, well, what other of these types of licenses have I generated in the past for this customer? For this customer under this agreement, under this type of product, and I could pick one of those. Let's pick that one. And I can see this is a license that was generated. I can see when it was generated. I can see it was generated to expire 7/16/2010 and so on. Now, I can do a couple of things at this point. I can do what's called cloning this license. So I can say, I want to take this license as a starting point and generate another license that's like this one, but maybe changing some of the parameters. Or I can just modify this previous license and send an email. We'll send an email to this existing user saying we've extended your subscription, whatever it might be. So in this case, let's say we're going to clone this license, and let's say we're going to make it much the same, but I want the bandwidth limit, whatever that parameter means in terms of this customer, to go to be 35. But this is going to be for a new license. Okay, so that all looks good. So I'm going to say, yep, that looks fine. I'm going to generate the key. Now, what AIM is going to do is it's set up that license. Now it's giving me the preview of the email it's going to send. So it's picked out the email address, the title can say, Dear Joe Smith, this is the standard email template that was set up by you for this product. Here's your license with the following information. Here's how you install it, installation instructions, and so on. And maybe I know this guy, so I'm going to make it a bit more personable. Dear Joe, how are the kids? Whatever it might be. Looks good. All right, I'm going to send that email. So, there you go. Just give it a moment. It sent that email. So, what I did there is I set up a license. I, in fact, picked a previous license because I knew it was going to be a bit like that one. Made a change to it. What AIM did when I said go is it set up the license in the hosted license server, and it sent the email off to the customer. So I'm now done. That customer will receive their email. They can go ahead and enter that product serial number, activate their license, and these limits that I set up here are going to apply to that license. So that was the how to set up a node lock, an activation, product activation type license in AIM. Now, another one you might do would be, let's go to the idea where there's an Orion server running on your customer's premises. So in this case, it's a little different. It's not product activation. That in this case, what you're doing is you need to provide that license key I mentioned to the end customer so they can load it into their Orion server. So in this case, let's go ahead and set that up. So in this scenario is the distributed floating license. Let's set it up with again, make it a 1-year license, 22nd September 2010. Bandwidth limit, again, whatever that parameter means in this context. There could be any number of such feature type parameters up here. User limits, let's make it 15. Maybe a 1-year technical support, and so on. Now, there are a couple of other control panels down here in this case. What AIM is going to set up is a custom download page where the user can come and pick up their license. And there's an additional security mechanism you have in this case, which is you can specify how many times this license key can be downloaded and what their window is for downloading that key. So they might have only 3 days, or they could have a week or something within which that key is going to be available to them. The other mechanism down here is the batch control panel, which is always available. And this is to deal with the scenario where, say, somebody is buying 5 licenses from you that are set up individually. And what you can do with the batch control panel is, instead of setting up a license, saying go, sending them 1 email, setting up license number 2, go. So instead of that user getting 5 emails, you can be saying for the first 4, this is not the last key in this batch. I'm doing a batch. So you generate 1 license, generate the second, generate the third, generate the fourth. When it comes to the 5th, you'd say, yes, this is the last key in the batch. So that end user is then going to get 1 email with all 5, the details for all 5 licenses in it, so you don't have to flood them with emails. Okay, so this looks good. It's the last key in the batch. It's Orion user license, so let's go ahead and generate that license. Again, there's email preview, Dear Joe, yeah, Dear Joe, all looks good. Right, let's send that. In this case, I'm going to actually show you this email in the, as to what that looks like. So let me go to, where is that? Let me go to here. So, so this is the license as it, let me just refresh that and make sure we get the most recent one. So this is the email account this license was sent to. So there we go. There's that one, desktop distributed license. So this is the email that we just sent. It says we created a license key for you. Here are the details. Bandwidth limited 25 gigabytes, 15 user count limit. And what AIM has provided is a download link here to download the license key. So I'm going to click on that. I'm the end user now picking up my license. I don't need to enter that. But there are 2 other fields here that I as the end user, can now put data in. So, and the scenario here would be that there's an Orion service name that I, as the end user, need to specify. Let's call it Acme, what I want to call it, and node locking information, whatever it might be. So there is a dish rated, but we're not requiring that until this very last point where the user is about to download their key and install it. So when I click download product key here, what AIM is going to do is going to take the license limit information I set up as the operator when I was configuring the license. It's going to combine it with this node locking and service name information being entered by the end user at this final point, and then dynamically generate that key. So there you go. It's generated the key. I can now download it and, as an end user, save it on my machine and load it into my Orion server. So AIM has the ability to obtain information at the last minute, if you will, from the person doing the actual installation of the software, and integrate that information into the key that's delivered to them. Okay, let me go back to here. There we go. Now let me ask one final polling question, if I may. Let me ask you. I'll come to your questions in a minute. I realize we're about out of time, so I'll try and make this quick. But please take a look. Pick one. Do you think the solutions described in this webinar might meet your needs? And please pick one answer here. Would it be yes, immediately? You can see an immediate application for this. Yeah, maybe then maybe a year, maybe in more than a year, maybe as a long-term thing, or not immediate interest, but interest in education only. So do please go ahead and give us your feedback there. We'd appreciate that, just to let you know what how you feel about the various types of solutions we've described. Give you a couple more minutes to answer those, then I'll come to questions. Actually, while you're answering that, I'll actually come to the, I don't want to distract people. While you're doing that, let me come to some of your questions. So I mentioned about the copy of the presentation. You will all get that. question about locking on virtual systems and how you can lock licenses to virtual systems. That's a good question. It comes up quite often. Because obviously the issue with virtual systems is that the hardware parameters can change over time for a legitimate user. So there are several things you can do there. First of which is that you can lock to, because the locking mechanism for Orion is entirely under your control as to what you lock to. You can lock to what will be the invariant parameters of a valid virtual session, so session ID, things such as that. So you can lock to things which are not going to change, even as the actual hardware a virtual session is running on might change. Another thing you can do for added security is you can use the least licensing mechanism I mentioned, and you can be having a periodic revalidation, that periodic phone home from a license, so that it can be checked. You have that extra validation step periodically to make sure that there's no cheating on a license. Because obviously, if let's say there is some form of cheating or abuse, and somebody activates a second license under a given under one given product serial number, there's a limited window if you're doing least licensing during which both of those can run. That when one of those instances tries to validate its license, it's going to be refused because the Orion server will know there's another instance active. One more question, and then actually I will stop because I'm running out of time. But one quickly was about platform support. So Orion supports a number of different platforms, multi-platform Java, so all Java-capable platforms, C, C++ on 32 and 64-bit Windows, Linux, Solaris, and Mac, and various Linux flavors, and also ActiveX DLL for supporting in .NET and C# and so on Windows platforms. Okay, I'm very well. I see other questions coming in. We are out of time, so we will get to those by email. I'd like to thank you very much for your time and your attention. And as I said, we'll have an email out to you shortly with access to this presentation. And if other questions do come up, do please feel free to get in touch. I'd like to thank you for your attention. Have a good day, and thank you for attending our webinar. Goodbye.